That was probably, and still is, the hardest service dog access issue that I have dealt with to date, because it just made me feel so degraded. Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to be talking about a serious issue that I don't think gets addressed enough sometimes, and that is service dog access issues. Now, I will preface this by saying that these can be very stressful and a little scary sometimes, because there have been times in my guide dog's career where I have felt like I wasn't sure if I was going to make it into an establishment or I was going to get kicked out or something like that. So it's a very stressful topic to talk about, but I think that it needs to be addressed. So the way that I'm addressing that today is I'm going to shed some light on the service dog access issues by telling my own stories, by telling you about some of the service dog access issues that I dealt with, and then explaining how I handled them and how it turned out. I'm going to give 5 examples of what I've dealt with. These are by no means the entire list of service dog access issues that I've dealt with, but these are the most memorable to me. So let's jump right in, and feel free to ask any questions in the comments section or anything like that. So here we go. Let's jump right in. Story number 1. I went to a college that was fairly close to a Panda Express. And so the first time that my friends and I went to this Panda Express, we got in line, we ordered our food, and then we sat down. And one of the employees came up to me and asked me, "Do you have your service dog ID?" And at this point, I'd owned my guide dog for about a year, and I really didn't want to fight with the person. And so I was just like, yeah, here you go. So I handed her the ID. She went back and did what she needed to do with it, and then she brought it back out to me. Well, the second time that we went back, I turned to my friends before we even went in, and I was like, I'm gonna tell them that it's illegal if they ask me again, just to try to give some education and awareness. So we go into the establishment for the second time. We are standing in line, ordering our food, when the employee says to me, "Do you have your service dog ID?" And I said, "Yes, I do. Under federal law, I just want you to know that this is illegal. You're not really allowed to ask for service dog ID, but I will cooperate with you. I will go ahead and give it to you. Here you go." And she stopped me and she's like, "Oh, well, it's corporate's policy. We have to follow corporate." And I was like, you know what? I totally understand that. I just want you to know that this is illegal under federal law. I'm going to cooperate with you today, but I just want you to know that this is not legal. So I gave her the ID. She gives it back to me. And then after that, I never had any issues with that restaurant. So I'm guessing that because of that encounter that I had with them, they updated their policies. So I think that's just a great example of how educating without being confrontational about it can yield good results. I think that coming across as collaborative and wanting to work with the person that you're engaging with can de-escalate the situation and make it a little bit easier for you to talk your way through the situation. Story number 2 is a couple months later, when I went home for Christmas. I was going to have lunch with my old vision teacher, and we went to an Italian restaurant, and we walked in, and the host said, "You're not allowed to have pets here." And I said, "Oh, well, he's a service dog. He's my guide dog. He's actually working because he helps me to navigate. I'm legally blind." And he just was like, "Oh, well, you're just not allowed to have dogs here." And I was like, no, he's a guide dog. Like, he is my service dog. I need him to be able to navigate my spaces safely. I have a service dog ID for him that I got from my guide dog school, if that would be helpful. It has his information on the front, but then it also has, the federal law and ADA law and everything on the back. And he's just like, no, I don't need your ID. You're not allowed to have dogs here. And I was just stunned. And I didn't really want to pull the manager card, so I was just sitting there thinking, what do I do in this situation? And finally, he just says, do you want me to go get my manager? And I was like, yeah, I think that would be helpful. Thank you. So he goes, he is in the manager's office, I guess, for about 2 minutes. And then he comes back out and he goes, I am so sorry. Like, right this way to your table. I'm gonna get you all set up. He checks in on us every 5 minutes. He's checking in and making sure that we're doing okay and making sure that we're enjoying our salad and everything. And I thought that this was a really good example of, again, education. He learned something that day. Story number 3. My friend and I went to the state fair. We were going through security. My friend made it through, and some guys stopped me from going through and said, you're not allowed to have your pet here. And I said, well, he's a guide dog. He's actually helping me to navigate and make sure that I stay safe. I'm legally blind. And they were like, oh, okay. Well, do you have paperwork for him? And my service dog ID from my guide dog school was in my backpack, in my purse, in my wallet. And I was just like, let me see if I can talk my way through. Technically, this is illegal, so let me just see if I can talk my way through before I get out the paperwork. And so I was like, well, under federal law, that's actually illegal. The only 2 questions that you're allowed to ask are, is it a service dog, and what tasks or functions does he perform? And the guy looked at me and he was just like, well, not here. And I was like, well, what do you mean not here? And he was like, not the state fair. Like, you're not allowed to have a pet. Like, I have to have the paperwork. And I was just like, okay, under federal law, the paperwork that you're asking for is illegal to ask for. You're not allowed to ask for that. He was just like, okay, so what does he do again? And I just explained again. I was just like, he's my guide dog. He helps me to navigate and make sure that I stay safe. I'm legally blind. And he just stopped me and he was like, wait, you're legally blind? And I was like, yes. And he was like, oh, well, come on through. And so I think this was another educational moment. I think that the security guard may have learned something. I was honestly surprised that I got stopped at the state fair, because out of all the places that should know service dog access issues, I would think that the state fair would be one of them. So I was a little bit surprised, and that was one of the very few situations where I thought to myself, I don't know if I'm going to be able to talk my way through this. And I was very stressed. But we made it through, and my friend and I had a great time at the state fair. Story number 4. So this was an Uber, and I always tell my Ubers that I'm bringing a guide dog and that I'm bringing a blanket for my dog and that I'm visually impaired, and could they please verbally announce that they're here because I can't see their car. And so I sent that text to an Uber driver. I was heading home from somewhere, and the guy said, okay, got it. And I was like, okay, great. So I wait for the Uber to get there. I'm standing outside waiting for the Uber because the app told me that the guy was 2 minutes away. And there were cars driving past all the time, right? So I didn't know who was who, and I expected him to verbally announce himself when he got to my location. I was standing out there and I was very confused because the app was telling me that the Uber was right here. And there was a parking spot, at least I thought there was a parking spot right in front of me, and I didn't see anyone, and I was just very confused. And finally, a friend of mine happened to walk out, and she came up to me and was like, hey, are you okay? And I was like, no, I'm trying to figure out where my Uber is because the app is telling me that the car is really close by, but I can't find it. And she looked at the app and she was like, okay, let me see if I can find it. and she looked at the cars and she was like, oh, they're down here. And it was like 2 or 3 spaces away from where I was. Now that could have been because the driver wasn't able to park in the space that I was standing in front of. But in any event, he didn't announce that he was here. So I walked down and I just kind of casually said to my friend, I was like, "Why? I wonder why he didn't tell me that he was here." So I went to the back, looked at the license plate, made sure that it matched the app, did all the security stuff. And then I opened the door and he just looks at me and he's like, "Oh, you have a dog?" And I was like, "Yeah, he's my service dog. Like, I think that I told you about it in the app. And also, you're not really allowed to deny him access or anything." He's like, "Well, it's my car. I don't really want animals in here." And at this point, I'm like halfway into getting in the car. I've set down the blanket to cover his floor and his seat as best as I can. And I'm halfway into getting into the car and I'm about to call my dog in. And I was just like, "Oh, okay. Like, that's, that's fine. Do you want me to get out? Like, I'm happy to get out." And he's like, no, I'll take you." And I was like, "Okay, thank you." So get my dog into the car, close the door, and he's just kind of rude to me and explaining that he doesn't like dogs in his car and he didn't really want to take an animal. And I was just like, okay, well. And so we finally get home and we get out of the car, and that was just kind of the whole situation. It just felt very weird to me. And I had offered to get out of the car. I had offered to leave. And he was like, no, I'll take you. And then he was very passive about it while I was in the car. So that's just a story about service dogs and Ubers, because Ubers can be a little bit tricky sometimes. Story number 5. So this was during an internship, and all the interns were going to an event, and the company was renting buses to take us all to the event and then back home. And so they had rented these buses, and we go to get on the buses. I find a seat for my guide dog and me, and this is kind of school bus seats, so I basically jam him in between the seats. And luckily he fit just fine, so that was good. But then the bus driver gets onto the bus and she comes back to me and she's like, "Oh, you have a dog." And I was like, "Yeah, he's my service dog, like he's here because I'm legally blind." And she was just like, "Oh, well then you need to like move to the back of the bus." And I was like, "What?" And she was like, "Yeah, you need to move to the back of the bus." And I was like, "Oh, okay." And at first I thought because she was trying to put me in a spot that was the accessible spot with more space for me and him, like where the wheelchairs would go and stuff. And so I was like, "Oh, okay, great." And as I'm headed back to the back of the bus, I realized that that's probably not the case, because I am walking through these seats that are still very narrow, like school bus seats. So I get to the back and I sit down, and she comes back to the back and is like, "Yeah, sorry, I would have told you about this sooner. I just didn't see you get on with your dog. But, there could be allergies and stuff, so we just need to put you in the back of the bus." And honestly, this was the hardest service dog access issue that I dealt with. And it's unclear whether this was in her right as a bus driver to do or not. But in any event, it still made me feel less than human to some extent. I can't exactly explain why it made me feel that way, but I felt very removed from the other people on the bus, and it didn't feel like I was being treated like the other interns. I was being treated like less than because I needed a service dog. And that was probably, and still is, the hardest service dog access issue that I have dealt with to date, because it just made me feel so degraded. Again, I don't know if this was a legal move. I think that, if you're in a restaurant and the table next to you is allergic to dogs, the restaurant is in their power to move you to a new spot. But to just say, well, for potential allergies or potential this and that, we're going to move you all the way to the back of the bus. I don't know if that's legal or not. In any event, it just made me feel awful. And thankfully, I did have a chance to talk to the company that I was interning for, and they were very apologetic and very understanding and very helpful with the whole situation. This was not the company's fault at all. This was the bus company that they rented from. You know, there's always an upside. And so thankfully, when I moved to the back of the bus, some people moved back with me. And so I didn't feel as alone. So I think some key takeaways from this video are that service dog access issues are real. They happen quite frequently, and they're very stressful and anxiety inducing when they do happen. Now, I just told you several stories about how well I dealt with these, but in every single instance that I have them and that I had them in these stories, I was anxious, I was stressed, I was shaking the whole time, and I always need a couple of minutes to come down from all of those situations. Like, my post-adrenaline kicks in so hard because when I'm dealing with them, when I'm in the middle of engaging with someone and dealing with these issues, I have to be very non-emotional. I have to be non-confrontational. I have to put on my customer service collaboration voice to deal with them so that I don't escalate the situation any further than it already is. But as soon as I'm done with that situation, you best believe that I am an anxious mess for a minute, just because I am so scared that I'm about to get kicked out of somewhere because of my service dog. And this happens more regularly than I want it to. The good thing is that I don't have it happen every day. This is not a daily occurrence. This isn't even a monthly occurrence, but it happens enough that it stresses me out every single time. And I also think that a lot of the reason that these issues are happening is because of fake service dogs. When I go into a restaurant and they deny me access, I wonder if they've had an issue with fake service dogs before. When I went to the state fair and they denied me access, I wonder if it's because somebody brought their pet into the state fair and it was a problem. Because they do have live animals at the state fair for the most part and everything. So it could have been a potential problem to have an untrained dog at the state fair. When I went to Panda Express and they asked me repeatedly for my service dog ID, I wondered if it was because they had trouble with fake service dogs and they were trying to weed the fake ones out by constantly asking for ID. So there you have it, some experiences that I've had with service dog access issues as a guide dog user. I think that it is way more difficult for people who aren't guide dog users, because guide dogs are, I think, more accepted than any other type of service dog, because any other type of service dog can be faked a lot more easily than faking a guide dog. So I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like, share, and subscribe. Also, please comment if you have any questions or if you have a service dog access issue story that you would like to share with us. I'm sure that we'd love to hear it and learn from you as to how that went. And I hope to see you all in the next video. Until then, I hope that your day is sunny and bright and full of time being outside and enjoying nature.